Okay, so welcome to this week's SNES Divination, and this week's is very different from last week. Last week, the reading kind of spread out of the reading. There was too much reading. It sort of was overwhelming. This week, it's like a Zen sort of reading or something. I feel a peace in this reading. It's extremely peaceful and simple. At least it seems simple before jumping in. I'll see how it evolves as we read it. But so I think what I find very interesting about this reading is that I'm getting again a very peaceful feeling from it, even in the violent kind of imagery. So, for example, here, I get the feeling that this invasion of colored spheres, which the gun is defending against, I feel as if maybe this is not so much a battle between enemies, but like a celebration, a mutual celebration. The way where, cracking open a piñata or something is a celebration, or a present or something like that. That the destroying of the spheres is something to be celebrated. I also get the feeling that these are there is something really good about these spheres, or not scary. And this is funny because last week's reading, one of the main things was that the ego found itself overpowered by the dead returning, right? And we had images kind of like this one last week, where there was like a central protagonist figure surrounded by enemies. But last week it felt as if the protagonist had to somehow learn to surrender or learn to die and give in to the hordes of enemies surrounding it. This week it feels as if the protagonist has gotten acquainted with the situation, has gotten used with the situation, has kind of gotten over the initial shock, and is now more comfortable in the situation. So that the incoming enemies are not seen to be as menacing as they were last week. In the same way that here, the incoming enemies actually look pretty nice, right? It's colored spheres. I mean, there's something sort of alluring about them, despite their status as enemies in relation to the canon, for example. So, yeah, the image I'm getting kind of is that of like going to a new land or someone's house where you don't feel comfortable, you don't feel at home, and after some time, you begin to feel at home. You begin to feel acquainted with the new place. The inhabitants of the place begin to show you around. You are beginning to be introduced to this new setting somehow. That's what I'm feeling from it. So basically, that's kind of the main theme, and I think it just gets expressed in different ways. So, for example, let's see where to start. Well, okay, Final Fantasy is a good example too, because the sword here, it's a weapon, right? It's an item of violence, but I don't feel it to be a menacing item this week. There is a peacefulness to it, a safety to it somehow. Again, despite the fact that these are images of violence in some way. Even Punch Out, I get this feeling that these three guys are not enemies in the true sense of the word. They seem to be kind of annoyed with each other in the same way that friends can be annoyed with each other. Like, they kind of want more space. But it feels as if they're just sort of friends stuck in a kind of tight room or something. There's something about even the context of violent fighting, like boxing, that seems somehow less menacing this week, less violent. I'm not sure why. So, Lord of Darkness. Here, a slight shift happens. And I'm not sure exactly how to describe it, in that I don't fully identify with this character, but he doesn't seem to be an enemy. It's interesting how this happens, it's sort of identification and perception of the vibe of an image during divination. In any case, I fully identify with her, for example. She clearly seems to be, to me, the protagonist of this image right now. So I don't know what you would call it. I egoically identify with her or something like that. But I don't identify with this guy. It feels more like he's some sort of an animus figure, a pure representation of strength and the solar aspect of the psyche, which of course is appropriate because he is illuminated, right? We are surrounded by darkness and gloom, but he is shining like he's made of gold or something. Like there's a huge sort of beam of light pointing in this direction or something. So there is a strange thing where the light is not being overpowered by the darkness, but the darkness is not evil in this context. It's more as if some sort of a peace treaty has been made between them, right? Something like that. See, even as a sort of weird aside, I even get this feeling in this cover. They're super illuminated. Like, it's part of the art style, of course, but that's what's jumping out at me in this reading, let's say, right? That there's light reflecting from their muscles, like they're just shining in light, despite being surrounded by this sort of blue, gloomy kind of indoor setting, right? So there's something about strength, represented like by the figure of the fighter, of the warrior, this Martian kind of energy, illuminated amidst the darkness and in peace with the darkness, a peace between them. One could kind of apply this reading, to this, Hammerlock Wrestling, in that it's also, what this cover is visually is basically just like a central focus of light. It's like a star in the middle of the darkness. So that's what I'm picking up from it, at least. Again, that these spheres are super bright, super illuminated amidst the darkness of the cosmos. And the arena where all this is happening is Saturn. It seems as if the arena where this is happening is time itself. Now, this is more of a intellectual exercise that I'm playing here. Like, until now, my reading was purely visceral, like based on what these images make me feel. This is what the images make me think. And I'm not too comfortable sharing it. I really don't like the intellectual side of this today, but I felt like sharing this one because it somehow connects with the title Final Fantasy, which already has a notion of time in it, right? Final implies time. It implies the final point in a timeline, or the climax of a certain event or something like that. So, okay, this is another aspect of the reading, I think. This guy is called Abbas, and he's very happy about it. Once again, I identify with this character. I think that this character is the, I don't know what the appropriate word would be, the ego, the person looking at the reading, I feel is this person. And he's very happy to have caught this fish So he's very happy to have caught something from the depths of the ocean, from the depths of the underworld. Very happy to have caught it. I get the feeling, in a free associative sort of way, that this fish is something that was, how to say, there was a union between this guy and the fish to begin with. But this union was separated, and now the fish has returned from the depths and has united once more with this guy, or something like that. It's as if it's a recovery of, whatever you want to call it, libido, regardless of gender, like a recovery of psychological energy, some sort of animal-like quality in the psyche, something like that. And that there is, again, a peace deal has been struck between the light and the underworld. There is a sort of a friendship being established between them, in the same way that here, the protagonist, whoever is, I don't know who's Pocky and who's Rocky, but I think these must be the two protagonists. So this is kind of like the strength card in the tarot, right? It's a tag team. It's a union between the human and the animal, the conscious and the unconscious. Somehow there has been a union that brings a sense of peace to the situation that was lacking last week, right? There is something about how they stand amidst this surrounding energy of, call them enemies, call them spirits, or whatever it may be. And okay, about the bus tournament, I suppose I do want to mention that there is this sort of visual thing going on here where these trees clearly show that the first half of this image is a lake, but the lake fades into a map, right? This is a map. So it kind of suggests that the fishing rod has descended into a numinous kind of lake. This is a lake that represents a map. It represents the map itself, almost. So there is something about this. The fish has come from, from, I don't know if the world, that doesn't ring true, but, something that isn't fully a lake, whatever that means. Something bigger than a lake, right? That's why it's a map. It's a whole sort of huge land down there. And very interestingly, this week I get this distinct feeling that this image is separate from all the rest. And I find this very interesting. I feel that all of these are part of the same kind of story. And this one, to me, feels different. And I'm not sure why. So we have the theme of light again, although, I'm kind of abusing that theme here because obviously there has to be light in order for us to see what's happening in the image. But it's the paper boy and he is flying in the sky, right? The bicycle is jumping at the height of the, well, not at the height of the rooftops, literally, but, it's shot in such a way to evoke the kind of like E.T. image of flying on a bicycle, I would say. It gives him a heroic, it makes the job of the paperboy seem more heroic, right? Because he's flying in this clear blue sky, sunny day kind of thing. And so I get the feeling that, he's wearing these sort of Nike sort of winged shoes and flying. So he literally is wearing winged shoes. The bicycle is kind of like the winged shoe. He's flying, he's wearing a cap, and he's carrying information. So this tempts me to say that I feel this is Mercury, some sort of mercurial figure, right? Carrying information and flying. And what I find interesting about this is that in the other images, right, there are characters that I identify with, and then there are characters that I think are like an animus figure or something, another aspect, an external aspect that isn't me. Here, I get an entirely different feeling that I can't quite place. And I think the reason I can't quite place it is because it hasn't arrived yet. So I get the feeling that this, whoever the figure of this information bearing character is, it's something that is in the process of arriving in the future. So probably, if I were to read it in the context of this being a weekly reading, I would say that maybe it's something that is happening this week into next week. So some sort of a future influx of information between this week and next week. Now, this is obviously sufficiently vague to mean anything, and past readings have shown me that there is something about this kind of reading that really doesn't say anything specific necessarily about the week, but more some sort of, I don't know, an archetypal mood that I am picking up on, and that maybe, can be of some interest to some viewers. I don't know. It's hard to tell exactly what the purpose of the reading is exactly, but in this case, I'm open to the possibility that this is something that relates to the reading itself. Let's say to this week and next week. Yeah, I mean, when I say that I don't know what the purpose of the reading is, I do want to make clear that I think the reading is purposeful precisely in this non-linear way of just as a sort of a dipping into the realm of archetype, right? I precisely enjoy this aspect of these kind of readings in that there is something non-linear about them, that it's not about knowing exactly what's going to happen on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, but in fact of erasing the boundaries between Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. It's like a reading that instead of giving you a map of the week, it dissolves the week into a non-local area somehow. And it's interesting how sometimes that gets interplayed with the possibility that this non-local area is actually saying something about the local week that you're in. So I suppose that's kind of the mystery of divination in itself, that there is this weird interplay between those two things. So anyway, I find that funny because I don't relate this Paperboy cover to any of the others. And the others just seem to be this weird kind of like a peacefulness between the influx of unconscious contents that were perceived as being scary last week. Some sort of a transition from that state to a state of peace between the ego towards the situation it finds itself in. Something like that. Yeah. As usual, I think I could go on and on and on, but I want to try and cut it short. Okay. Well, thanks for listening, and see you next week.